Shows that make you laugh. Shows that make you think. Music that moves you. It could only be one place. Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
Welcome to The Actor's Choice, where the actors and actresses have a chance to talk about themselves and their careers. Join us now for the next hour as we explore the marvelous industry of acting by actors and actresses from today's exciting show business world. And now, direct from Hollywood, here's your host, Ron Brewington.
Hi everybody, I'm Ron Brewington and welcome to The Actor's Choice. First, we want to say Happy New Year to each and every one of our viewers and listeners. We wish you that this is going to be a good year for you. We thought that we would start off the new year with a well-known Hollywood person. I happen to know a writer who wrote a book about such a person. Our subject today, writer, producer, director Hal Roach. Mr. Roach was a leading pioneer in shaping American film comedy. For nearly 40 years, he introduced film audiences to the renowned team of Laurel and Hardy, the Our Gang comedies, and many, many others. So, ladies and gentlemen, here today to talk about Mr. Roach is author and educator Harry Gill. Harry, thank you so much for joining us today. Happy New Year to you.
Well, thank you, Ron. First of all, thanks for having me on your show.
Pleasure.
And I wish you and everyone else watching this show a very happy, healthy, and a prosperous new year.
Indeed. Well, thank you for bringing this Hollywood legend to us today, definitely. First of all, with a man of what he did, over 40, almost 50 years, where do you begin from? I mean, for several years, you lived next door to this gentleman and became a good friend. Can you tell us about that, please?
Well, I've had a wonderful life, but having Hal Roach as a friend was definitely the best. I moved in on Stradella Road in Bel Air. I was renting part of the house, and then my landlady one day said, "Harry, through the kitchen window, do you see that old man right there shouting at his dog and all that? He is Hal Roach. He's made all those movies about Laurel and Hardy and Little Rascals." And I looked at her. She was aging. I said, "Oh, well, another person who believes that someone living next door to them is famous." And well, later on, I really did come to know that was Hal Roach. And I would say hello to him when he would take his walk in the afternoon with his dogs. And one day, I plucked enough courage, and I said, "Mr. Roach, I would like to get tickets to see Oscars, because I understand no one should die till they have seen one." And then his mate told me, "Come at a certain time on such and such day, then he'll be free to see you." Well, I'm living next door, 10 yards away. And well, the phone rang, and the mate said, "Mr. Roach wants to know, why are you 2 minutes late?" And I couldn't imagine. This person who was in his 90s was so punctual. So I went over to his house. He greeted me very nicely, and I came straight up, said, "Mr. Roach, I need, I'm sure you have those tickets." And he said, "Harry, I've not been to Oscar presentations myself in years. The reason is I get a far better view on television. So if you want to see Oscars, you're welcome to join me and we can watch together." And I said, "Fine, Mr. Roach, and now you can talk what you like." And then he told me about the photographs that he had, the photograph Will Rogers, his best friend, and then of course Sunshine Sammy, and then there was Laurel and Hardy, Oliver Hardy's photograph, and the photograph of a train that he had taken all the from Bombay to Taj Mahal, and with his wife and everyone. So it was a wonderful, yes.
We need to get this out up front. The book that you wrote was done at his request. Is that correct?
Yes. What happened is, Mr. Roach. All of my life, I called him Mr. Roach. I never became familiar. I'm from the old English school that you treat people of age with respect. And so Mr. Roach told me, he said, Harry, it gets lonely here. And come here as often as you like. And in fact, within few days, he asked me to come and live at his place. The thing that shocked me was, here this was a person known the world over, and he was lonely. He had his children, but he was lonely because they had their own lives to lead. And so that really touched me deeply. He wanted some work done, typing, etc. I said, Mr. Roach, I'll do it as a friend, but I am not going to move in with you. I lived less than 10 yards away. My bedroom and his, in fact, was less than 10. I said, you call me and I'll be there anytime. And he called me often. And I would come. And it was interesting. Sometimes he would call because Charlie Chaplin's movie, His Old Friend, was been shown, or the VCR light underneath his bed was blinking and was bothering him at 11 o'clock at night. Harry, can you turn it off? And I would. So that's how I came to meet him.
Gotcha. Was the family permission needed to do the book?
No, it wasn't. In fact, when Hal Roach talked about all these people, Cary Grant, Jean Harlow, Charlie Chaplin, William Randolph Hearst, I asked him, I said, Mr. Roach, why don't you write a book? He said, Harry, I'll be very honest with you. I can't write English. And then he elaborated. He said, in my school in Elmira, any class I passed, I had to sit it through twice. And any time I passed is simply because of the sympathy of the teacher, because he was such a troublemaker. They would just pass him. And he said, I can't write. And then eventually he said, why don't you write? And then I said, if you wish to, I would. And so we decided to make some audio recordings. I must regret, one of the few regrets I have in life, that I did not make video recordings. And then he had all his faculties when he was in his early 90s. When he asked me to move into his house, I said, what would your children say? He said, this is my house. And I will have anyone living here that I want. And so he had full faculties. And in fact, I have a letter where he asked me to interview some guy, Gwen, who had worked with him in building Santa Anita racetrack. And so I had to go all the way to Palos Verdes to interview him and go over how they went over building the racetrack in Santa Anita. So I didn't need, he had all his faculties, and there was no reason for me to go around and asking anyone, should I write his book? It was his wish. Yeah.
Now you actually took an audio tape machine with you, and you took notes and everything like that?
I did.
Yes.
In fact, the few things that Mr. Roach would go to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening. And I would ask him, did you see this? Did you see that? He said, no, Harry, I go to bed at 8 o'clock. The reason being, the people in his household preferred a lower temperature at night, and it would feel very cold. And so he would just tuck himself to bed at 8 o'clock. And the second thing was, he had gone deaf with all the shooting he had done. So he would be sitting in the bed, the phone would ring, and he didn't even know. And so I did two things for him that changed his life. Number one, I bought him an oil heater.
Okay.
Because he was afraid that if there was a regular heater, the dogs would tilt it over and set the house on fire. So with the oil radiator, no matter what, he would be safe. And number two, on a Christmas day, with his permission, I got him a little gadget that you plug in there, and anytime the phone rings, his lamp would go on. So this way, he would not miss any calls. And then, of course, I couldn't sit and write everything as he spoke, so we made the recordings. And it clearly says, Harry, now where did we leave off? And, this and that. So it was done with his permission.
Right. What was it like for you being in his presence?
Hi, Mr. Roach. I know you are here. It was the highlight of my life. My parents were working class. I was born in Kenya. My father worked for British Railways. And then my parents sent me to England. I'd heard about all these Laurel and Hardy movies, The Little Rascals, heard about Cecil B. DeMille and William Randolph Hearst, Charlie Chaplin. And now here I'm sitting next to a man who knew every one of them. And the most amazing part, I would see him 4 or 5 times a day. But most of our conversations took place in the evening. He'll be sitting in his reclining chair. I'll be sitting opposite to him. There'll be his swimming pool and the setting sun. And when he would talk, I would say to myself, what a privilege it is to know someone who had achieved so much and yet was so humble and so giving. And so it was just awe-inspiring. And this is how, when he would talk about Cary Grant and how he made the first video clip with Marilyn Monroe, and you really wonder, could this be true? And there it was. He was very modest.
You had a very interesting, brilliant career. You worked as a British volunteer in every country from Mexico to Argentina, et cetera, et cetera. What else did you do in your life, sir?
Well, I was sent to England by my parents for my education. And my mother always said, bless her, in fact, in our scriptures, it's written, education is only worth it if it's for the benefit of humanity. And my mother instilled that value in me. So once I had got my master's in University of London, interestingly enough, I went to a college called Y College in Kent, founded in 1447.
How's it for my time?
And they only took 92 students per year.
Wow.
And clearly they made a mistake when they took me. Anyway, and so once I had got my master's in economics for developing countries, that was their specialty. And my mother's words were ringing in my ears. Make sure you give back to society what they have the right to expect from you. And so I applied to be a British volunteer. By the way, President Kennedy got the idea of the Peace Corps because he had lived in England, and they had the British volunteer program before the Peace Corps. Now here's a little comical, straight out of Hal Roach's comedy. So the volunteer program asked me where I wanted to work. I said I want to work in Kenya, and they ask you reasons. Agencies are very good, government agency. I said I'd like to go back to Kenya to give what the country gave to me. And the other reasons were I spoke Swahili and I was familiar with the tribes. Second country of choice, Tanzania, right south of there. Again, spoke Swahili, familiar with the tribes. Third choice, India, speak 2 languages, familiar with the religions. And they sent me to Latin America.
Wow, what was that guy thinking about?
And there, I turned out to be very fortunate for a volunteer.
Yes.
I ended up writing loan proposals on behalf of the subsistent farmers to the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. And I had the good fortune of working from every country from Mexico to Argentina, Panama to Tobago, but for Chile and Cuba. Chile because Pinochet was there. Inter-American Development Bank did not give loans. Cuba, for obvious reasons.
Yes.
I must say, Ron, I always tell my students, go and work as a volunteer. One of the biggest regrets people have is when they were young, they had no commitments, they did not give something of themselves to the society. And in fact, I tell you, although I wrote loan proposals running into millions of dollars, I got more than I ever gave back to anyone as a volunteer. And so, yes, it has been a wonderful life.
I see you listen to your mother because you still continue to, as I call it, educate students. You are a professor of economics at Santa Monica College?
Yes, I am. I've been there since '84 as a part-timer, first in the math department, then right away within a few months I was offered a teaching position, and I've been a full-time faculty member there since '86. Well, can I thank Dr. Moore, the former president, for giving me that job? I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Good school, by the way.
Great school. Yeah. Well, we are colleagues.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
We both worked there. Yes, indeed. Back to the book, Hollywood Pioneer. This is the book that you brought with you today, sir. Hollywood Pioneer.
Yeah.
The Life and Times of Hal Roach. I noted that according to Mr. Roach, all profits from this book, and it's on the back of the book there, will be donated to leprosy associations and clinics around the world. Can you explain why, sir?
Well, Ron, just call me Harry.
Harry. 22 years of military experience. Can't help myself. Freudian slip.
We are colleagues and friends.
Yes.
Well, Ron, Hal Roach was born in Elmira, New York, and at the age of 16, like myself, his parents sent him to Seattle so he could have some profession. By the way, it's interesting that all his life, his goal was to save $1,000 and to get married. All his life, he was always looking for a family life. So when he went to Seattle, it rained there.
Yes.
He was without a job. He got fired from more jobs straight out of Laurel and Hardy than you would ever think. And then he went to Alaska, which was frozen. By the way, there he met Gulbenkian. They had the gold mines there, and Hal Roach had to clear the snow for the carriages to go through. Then he came back to Seattle. So he's seen hunger, he's seen poverty, he's been lonely. And when he went on a world trip with his wife and friends, he went to Bombay, where he saw people with leprosy. And he told me this. He said, Harry, I can't believe it. And these are shops out there full of all the food and all the luxuries. And these people were just sitting there, and it touched him so deeply that in our conversations, he said, anything that is made from a book written about him, it'll be donated to leprosy associations around the world. And there it is. And that's, and you know, the point is, he told me this personally, but no one was there to witness this, but I want to do it. Why? Because of my love and my respect to my dear friend Hal Roach. Yeah.
Also, you used the name of Harjinder Singh as the author. Can you explain that, sir?
Actually, that is my legal name, Harjinder Singh. Singh is a middle name for all Sikhs.
Okay.
And Kaur, which means a princess for all the ladies. So we have the status of women been given the middle name princess for everyone.
Okay.
And when I went to school in England, I was 16, and the headmaster called me into his office on the first day, and he said, your name, Har. He said, look, if I can't say it, out there they will not be able to say it. So we got to shorten it. And he said, H-A-R, we're going to call you Harry. And in fact, I've lived with Harry much longer than I've lived with Harjinder. But I wrote down Harjinder because that's my legal name.
Legal name.
Yeah.
Okay. How long did it take you to write that book?
It took me years. The reason being, I had other commitments. I was writing econ textbooks. Then I've written, can I mention it?
Please.
When I was working as a volunteer in Dominican Republic, I was arguing with my colleagues that the gross domestic product of Dominican Republic is a fraction of a billion, and my American colleagues were talking in billions. And then we found out that an American billion has only 9 zeros, while the American billion, a British billion, has 12. So I wrote a book about that too, the differences. It's very serious differences. For example, a student could easily get from an A to a D because the punctuation is different and other factors. So it took me a while, but it was worth it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he never got a chance to see it. Mr. Roach never saw it.
Actually, he did see some of the chapters I had written.
Okay.
He had the introduction, and then the first chapter, and also on William Randolph First. He did.
Put
Yeah.
a smile on his face, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good writing.
And
good writing.
Thank you.
Definitely. Definitely. Okay. And I like the way you wrote the book. You wrote it in 16 chapters in a nice chronological order. First, you talk about his childhood in Elmira, New York, where he's buried at now.
Yeah. He was born in Elmira. His mother ran a house. You know, the incident right away is straight out of a comedy.
Okay.
His mother had a son. She wanted the second child to be a daughter. The deliveries were done at home. The doctor came along and she said, "It's a boy." She said, No, it's a girl." And he said, No, ma'am, it's a boy. She said, No, it's a girl. And the doctor had to really convince her that it was a boy, and that's hell. And he was born there, and astonishingly enough, he was very hardworking. He would go to school where he wasn't very good at, but then he would always have some job working as a pop boy, or then also in Elmira, being an usher for some of the cinemas that were there. All in all, it was a happy childhood. Basically failed every class. He wanted to be a sports person. He couldn't be because of his grades, and then he was a protector to his older brother. He said his mother had instilled into the older brother he's never to fight back. So even when people bullied him and kicked his brother, he would not do a thing. But Hal Roach then became the defender of his brother. In fact, when he became very famous and rich, his brother had a job here in his studio.
These studios.
Yeah.
Here today.
By the way, I just want to mention, Ron, how ironic it is. First time Hal Roach walked into Universal Studio lot, it was on the corner of Gower and Sunset. You tell me, what are the chances of being interviewed about a book on Hal Roach and being on the same spot more than nearly 103 years later?
Wow.
Yeah.
Coincidental. Very coincidental. Okay. He talks about getting started in Hollywood around 1912. He had done some other work in different places. Can you talk about what led him up to coming here to Hollywood?
First he was in Seattle.
Right.
He got kicked from many jobs. Then he thought he'll make some money. There was a job about taking coal to Alaska. And the irony was, the money he had made he lost right away playing a blackjack, a game that he didn't even understand. And then in Alaska, it was so difficult. His main job was a sledger and a mail person.
Okay.
And sledger is moving snow so the carts can go through. And he had enough of it. Then he got one they call a ticket that cities would give you that ticket on the condition you'll never return. So he got that and he came back to Seattle. And then good luck had it that he started to work for an ice cream factory that was run by Mrs. Hagen. And Hal Roach often mentioned Mrs. Hagen. She was in her mid-50s, and that was a young lad. The reason he mentioned about her was she would invite him home, and that gave him a little family atmosphere that Hal Roach was looking for.
Right.
And more importantly, she told him, look, you don't have to curse all the time. You're a nice, cultured man. And then she showed him the table manners, how you open the door for a lady. So he really thinks that later on when he became successful, the person who had eased him into better manners was Mrs. Hagen. And in fact, there's a photograph in the book, the truck that he drove for Mrs. Hagen. And I asked him, did he ever keep in touch with her? And he said no. Now, the other thing that had happened in Seattle, he got into a fight with someone out there. He was a bully, and he won. And then it got into the newspapers. Some policeman read it, and he thought, as Hal put it, okay, that the policeman thought he was going to be the next great white hope. And he said, you know, he would go to practice there, and the very policeman, he was so clumsy, he elbowed Hal in a way that knocked his part of his shoulder out. So that died Hal's choice or wish to be a boxer. And then he came to Bakersfield because the White Truck Company was going to be providing trucks to Bakersfield and Los Angeles. And he worked there and mainly laying oil pipelines from Bakersfield all the way to San Pedro.
Wow. Interesting. Busy man. A little off the cuff here. During the many talks that you had with Hal, there was any topic that came up most often?
Ron, one morning when he called me into his house, and I went, he was in his bed. He said, Harry, which woman is considered the most beautiful ever in the Hollywood industry? And in England, they always talked about Jean Harlow. And I lucked out. I said, Jean Harlow. He said, Harry, she was my girlfriend. He said, it's going to appear cockeyed. I'm not a handsome man. I'm not charismatic. But she was my girlfriend. And then he talked about how Jean Harlow, at the age of 16, had eloped. She's from Kansas, married a rich man's son. And one day he was in his studio and in the set, and there was Jean Harlow with her mother, with her agent, and her husband. And Hal said, I'd never seen such a pretty face and such a beautiful body. And he said, right away, I told my secretary, bring me the contract and give a 5-year contract to Jean Harlow. And then what happened is, 3 months later, she came into her office, said, Mr. Roach, my husband doesn't like this movie industry, so we are going back. And he said, don't you worry. Hal told his staff to bring Jean Harlow's contract. He said, there, ripped it up, just like Hal said. And he ripped, and then what happened is, a few months later, Hal Roach went on the set, and who's standing there with her mother, Jean Harlow. And he said, what are you doing here? she said, "Can I come and see you in your office?" He said, "Sure." So she came. She said, "I have to get this off my chest. The way and the minute you tore my contract, I fell in love with you. I know you're married. I know you have 2 children. I'm not going to ruin your marriage, but I have to tell you I love you for the rest of my life." She gave him the phone number, and that was it. And Hal said one day he had a little too much to drink, 11 o'clock at night, got a little lonely, and called her. She gave the address. She said, "Now, come on over." They went, and being whatever it is, happened. And then they didn't see each other for a while. And again, Hal got intoxicated, went and saw her again. And they decided to see a movie. And it was 11 o'clock at night. They both sat down at the back. And they were a Christian couple, as Hal said, who were his wife's friends. So they thought Hal was all by himself, and they turned around, and there he was with Jean Harlow. And they never talked to him since, and they broke off again. So Jean Harlow, after a couple of marriages and a couple of engagements, became pregnant by Hal, by Mr. Roach. And then he did tell the mother, by the way, this relationship was in fact condoned or even encouraged by Jean Harlow's mother. Hal had someone in mind, but the mother had someone different. And things went wrong. She died. She was only 26. Although she was very beautiful, Hal said he was never in love with her. And Hal told me there were people who imagined they were in love with her. And he said that one individual had offered him $10,000 if he would make an arrangement so he could spend time with Jean Harlow. And I asked him, "Is that guy alive?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Can I have his name?" He said, "No." Must have been a very important person.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, Jean Harlow. Another famous name got into his life. He was the first person to make a commercial using Marilyn Monroe.
You know, when Mr. Roach used to tell me these things, it was unbelievable. You know, everyone who was somebody, he had been connected with them from the word go. Hal was friendly with the president of Union Oil.
Okay.
And so the president wanted an ad that'll be comical, that would attract attention right away. So he naturally asked his friend Hal to do it. So Hal picked up the phone, just called a talent agency and said, "I want someone who's very attractive," so on and so forth. And who turned up? Marilyn Monroe. And then he made this little wonderful clip. So this beautiful blonde is sitting in a car and about to drive. But one very handsome man thinks she's out of gasoline, as you would say petrol in England, gasoline. So he decides to give the car a push. A second guy standing on the curb sees this beautiful lady in the car, and he also thinks that she needs gasoline, and he starts to give a push. Before long, 5-6 people who don't even know, they're giving this car a push, and they push her in the Union Oil. And she gets out. It said, "My car needs the best treatment there is, and Union Oil is what my car needs." Actually, Aaron, have you ever seen that video clip?
No, I haven't.
It's a wonderful one. It really shows Hal at his best.
At his best.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. In the book, you also he did a chapter on the king of silent films, Charlie Chaplin.
Hal was once without a job. He went to SNA,
Okay.
Studios. And there he was offered a job, $45 a week, plus free board and lodge in the athletics club. And it's a studio not far from here. And in those days, there were silent movies, noise didn't matter. And Hal was given one part of the studio to make the movies. And who was the other person on the other set? Charlie Chaplin.
Oh.
And you know, they became best of friends. They lived together in the athletic club. They drove together. And here's an interesting thing. Charlie told Hal, before lunchtime, I want you to come onto my set. Hal thought that was peculiar. Why? And then Charlie said, because I tell you to. And then Hal found out that Charlie's contract stated anyone who was on his set was to have a free lunch and dinner. And so this is how it was. And you know, there are few things. Hal and Charlie would go out for a walk, and anytime Charlie would look at someone who was without home, big trousers, loose shoes, and he would just watch people and study them. And he would tell Mr. Roach, but for the grace of God go I. Because Charlie had a very poverty-stricken childhood.
I see.
Actually, had it not been for him and his brother, because Charlie's mother had mental issues. The father was never in the picture. Sid, Chaplin's half-brother, told Hal, you can talk about anything you want, but please never talk about my father. And so there are a couple of things that happened. Charlie had a lot of money, made a lot, but he lived as if he was still very poor. So both of them went to buy a hat, and there was a $5 hat. Hal bought it, wrote a check, and then Chaplin would try one, put it away, try one. And Mr. Roach said, Charlie, look, I'll buy one for you. And so he did. Then Chaplin said, I'm going to buy one for myself, and it was $10. And Mr. Roach said, look, write a check out. So Chaplin wrote his first check ever, and the way the book looked, Mr. Roach said must have been in his pocket forever. The check was written, and Hal went around the shop just looking around one hat or another, and the cashiers were looking at him, and Hal wondered what had happened. He went there, and Charlie had written $10 and scratched everything out. And they said, Mr. Roach, what are we going to do with this check that Chaplin has written? And so Hal said, Charlie, look, this is a reputable store. What are they going to do with your check? You have canceled your name. You have canceled the name of the bank. What's going to happen? And he said, no, I'm not going to write it. So Hal said, Charlie, write another check. Believe me, if they draw $1 more than the $10, I'll give you the money. So Charlie learned to write his check as educated by Mr. Roach. Yeah.
So many historical people are in your book. For example, William Randolph Hearst was a good friend of Mr. Roach.
I had friends from England, and I took them to Hearst Castle, and then I asked Mr. Roach, have you ever been to Hearst Castle? Me? I was a regular there every weekend. I lived in Casa del Sol. Me and my wife, we were the only ones who had a reserved place.
Yes.
And he knew William Randolph Hearst as well as anyone. And he was a regular there, like all the other people, like Cary Grant and Charlie Chaplin. And William, Mr. Hearst, lived there with his girlfriend Marion Davis. Although William was married with his sons, they lived in New York. His wife refused to give him a divorce, so at the age of mid-50s, he was living with his very young lady, and she and Mrs. Roach became best of friends. And so Mr. Roach knew William as well as anyone else.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that he did mention, Mr. Roach did, is that people talk about there were a lot of questionable parties at his place. At his castle, he said, anyone who says it had never been there. He said the only time I'd seen a nude lady was William had built a huge mansion on the beach of Santa Monica. And there was a big party, and there was a lady who was a very famous swimmer, and her husband had died in the First World War in a plane crash, so he had a function for her. And so around 12 o'clock, William said, now, this lady has taken some diving lessons, and she's going to show it to us, what's going to happen. So everyone was standing around the pool. And out there was some old rubber swimming suits that she had put on. And Hal said, well, she stood there and everyone was watching, and the minute she did this, the whole thing came off. And William was running around with the towel trying to cover her up.
Yeah.
He said that's the only time.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Will Rogers was his best friend. As we know, Will Rogers died in a plane crash in Alaska in 1935. I understand Mr. Roach felt partly responsible for his death.
In fact, there's a photograph of Will Rogers saying, the man who taught Hal how to play polo. They were best of friends, and their homes were pretty not too close, and they would go out every Sunday. With families would go out on a picnic. And then what had happened is the gentleman who had bought Bel Air, he was very kind of traditional in his thinking. He said, I don't want any actors, any minorities living in this area. So Hal and Will Rogers' family had gone on with this individual, his family, for a picnic. And a couple of weeks later, the guy called and he said to Will Rogers, I don't like the people in the movie business, and I understand Hal Roach is in the movie business, so I'm not interested in going out with picnic with him. And Will Rogers said, well, you don't like them? I do. And he put the phone down.
Good man.
Now, one of the things that Will Rogers and Hal did, they loved polo. And in fact, Hal Roach, when he bought his 10-acre studio in Culver City, carved out 3 acres so they could practice polo. And Hal said he'll be there with Will Rogers, his animal trainer, and his big William, his help, African-American help. And now, why did Hal Roach feel partly responsible for Will Rogers' death? Now, certainly Will Rogers had decided to fly up north through Alaska to go around the world with Wiley Post. He was a great pilot, but there was a problem. He had only one eye. He had to have special training lessons, and the planes they had, kind of the 2 planes that had been kind of, if I can say, merged, so they could fly long distances, land on water. And at that time, there was going to be a polo competition in Honolulu.
Okay.
And Hal asked Will to come and join them. And Hal really feels if he had asked Will a little more insistently, Will, look, you're part of the team. It's not that you had planned to go around the globe with this gentleman, years ago. It was on the spur of a moment. And why don't you come and to be on the polo team?
Right.
And so Mr. Roach said if he had asked a little more insistently, Will would have come along, and we would have been alive for years. And Hal had a rule that when he was playing polo, there were going to be no telegrams, no calls from the studio. He loved this game. By the way, when they were going on a ship Hal had taken all his family. Hal was a boxer in his younger days, so was his son. And on the ship, the father and the son decided to have a little bit of boxing competition. And the son hit him so hard he fractured his rib.
Wow.
And Hal was playing polo when the telegram arrived. And he knew it had to be serious.
Yes.
And when it was the death of his best friend, Will Rogers.
Wow. Wow. The book has so many details in it about famous people. You did a great job, Harry. Just a fabulous job collecting that information, putting it in a great way. One of the things that we don't have much, we're running out of time right now, but I want people to see what a short clip of what was supposedly the last public appearance of Hal Roach on the Jay Leno Show.
All right.
I got your check. He said to me, I'm 100. I want my check before I go on. I have your check right here. You know, once a producer, always a producer.
Now, I just want to see.
Now, this is a talkie, remember now. Is that sufficient?
Don't see it.
Well, trust me, it's in there. Oh, you know, once they live through the Depression, they never forget.
Oh, this is $569. I would have charged you twice as much if I knew you had as many
Well, I'm sorry.
people as that.
That's why you should read your contract.
Yeah.
Let me wish you a happy birthday, sir. 100 years old. How is it going?
I am 107 days old. I'm working on my second 100. Yeah, that many people.
That many people. And you're still driving. You still drive your car?
Not necessarily.
Not much?
No, I have a license that lasts me till I'm 102.
No.
But I am not driving now because I get a little jittery when
Yeah.
I do. But I could drive if I wanted to.
Yeah. When was the last time you renewed your license? How old were you?
It was a 5-year license, and I got 2 more years to go.
Now, when you walk into the DMV and they say, 98 years old, do you take the test? Do they make you go through the whole?
Give me that again.
When you walk in
Yeah.
and they look at your license and they see 98 years old at the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, do they make you take a special test, or do you just take the regular test?
It's getting a little more embarrassing as you ask, because a very nice lady was head of the thing, and she got me. I didn't take any tests of any kind.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Harold.
remember that interview very well.
Yes. Harold Eugene Roach Sr., born January 14, 1892 in Elmira, New York. He died of pneumonia on November 2nd, 1992 at his home in Bel Air. When was the last time you actually saw him?
Now, what had happened is, in 91, I bought a home in Santa Monica.
Uh-huh.
He did not like it. He wanted me to be with him all the time. And so what had happened is, although I lived in Santa Monica, I would still go and see him once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And just because, you know, at that age, all the people they know, they passed away. And so what had happened one day, her daughter, the oldest daughter, called me up and said, Harry, Dad has not spoken for several days, and you know, you were so close to him, and I think maybe you want to see him. So I said, yes, I would. And I went to his room, and there he was in bed with all the tubes. And I walked in, and I looked at him with great reverence. And I said, Mr. Roach, this is Harry. And please believe me. He said, hi, Harry. And that's the first time he had spoken in days. 3 minutes later, Mr. Roach passed away. This is. I think her daughter was right.
Yes.
That he was just. I don't want to sound ostentatious or pompous. Sometimes we believe that people are waiting to say final goodbye to someone who was close to them.
Yes.
And in the last 8-9 years of his life, I was a listener and a helper, and so that's the last time I saw him, and it'll be in my memory forever. Like everything else he had said. Yeah.
Excellent. You went to the funeral, of course.
And I went to the funeral. There were a lot of people who had been in our gang, and other individuals who had been in his other comedies, in either Laurel and Hardy, and they had a little function for him in Ballet Country Club, where I went. By the way, I used to go to Ballet Country Club, thank you, Mr. Roach, quite often with him. But once what had happened is, I was in there, and 8 or 9 people stood around. They said, how do you know Mr. Roach? I said, he lives next door to me. That's just a joke. But yes.
We have a picture of his headstone. Can you show us that picture of his headstone? It's interesting that he's buried in a cemetery in Elmira,
Yes.
New York, in the same cemetery as Mark Twain. It's interesting that both of them are there.
You know, actually, Hal had met Mark Twain. Some of the best writing he had done was, Mark Twain had done when he was in Elmira. And Hal was very young. But there's an interesting incident in the church.
Yes.
They had the speaker who was talking about the poor, starving Chinese, and they wanted a donation. And Hal said, fine, I'll give them about 10 cents. But this old man went on and on and said, forget this, I'm not going to give any. And I was in his bedroom when the call came from Elmira saying that they wanted to name the main road after him. He said, no, Mark Twain is far more famous than I have been or ever will be. And I will not have it. I don't mind you naming a secondary road to my name, but the main road has to be marked Mark Twain.
Okay.
Again, it shows the humility of this wonderful man.
Yes. Harry, you got a great book here. How can we get a hold of a copy?
Oh, it's on Amazon.
Okay, on Amazon.
And there it is. And by the way, I hope people will buy it. And every cent of the profit goes to leprosy associations around the world.
Right. Hollywood Pioneer, The Life and Times of Hal Roach by Harjinder Singh. Thank you so much, Harry. I hope that they make a movie out of this. This should be a excellent piece of work.
Well, number one, Ron, thank you so much for
My
asking
pleasure.
me to be. Thank you for asking me to be on your show. And yes, I hope they'll make a movie out of it. You know, they have made movies about Charlie Chaplin and others, and I don't see why not Hal Roach. After all, history accepts the fact that he made more comedies than any other studio in the world. They used to call it the fun factory of the world.
Right.
And it is true. And so I hope they make a movie out of my dear friend Hal Roach.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ron.
And we want to thank you very much for joining us, and Happy New Year to everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, sir.